let's cross now to our senior political reporter, Ziyanda Ngobo, who's been watching the speeches on the stage tonight, watching events from, in fact, the Chinese state visits all the way through the day. Ziyanda, good evening to you. What stood out for you in these speeches tonight?
Good evening to you, Stephen. Well, I tell you what, I'm not surprised by some of the themes that have been coming out from the heads of state. Talk about the growth of and the continued mutual cooperation, reflecting then, of course, on the fact that it's 42% of the globe's GDP that's sitting here at the Sandton Convention Center this evening, reflecting on issues such as infrastructure development, education, and in particular of particular interest, Stephen, is that of climate change and how each of these countries has been adversely affected by climate change and the balancing act that these countries have had to have within their own domestic policy when it comes to their energy plans. I tell you what, Stephen, one of the things that the globe is looking out for as this meeting continues over the next couple of days is the tangibles that will come out, given the skepticism that has taken place regarding the tangibles and whether or not it's actually a body that can produce an alternative financial system that would be born out of that new development bank and the continued relations, but also the bilateral relations between the countries within the Brics. So earlier on, for an example, Stephen, we heard from President Cyril Ramaphosa reflecting on the fact that, one of the greatest gains that we've made is the access to the Chinese market insofar as our exports of beef. So let's listen to what he had to say in that regard earlier.
Exported to the Chinese market. We are also very delighted that China has agreed to reopen the export of beef to China. This is going to give a huge boost to our agricultural sector. Our multilateral cooperation, we've agreed on a number of issues. President Xi Jinping and I have agreed to consult closely on issues of common concern, including in the Brics context, as well as the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, on the G77 plus China, and also in the G20.
As you can hear, Stephen, that's one of the things that was discussed. And access to markets is critical for emerging markets such as South Africa, and it even falls within the agenda of the AU's 2063, continental agenda. In fact, one of the biggest issues that was raised even at the recent Russia-Africa summit is the lack of access to both African markets, and that's why there's that African Continental Free Trade Area agreement that African leaders are trying to get underway. But even when it comes to the international market, so this is quite a significant gain. But one of the other key things that came out of the state visit earlier is, especially from Chinese President Xi Jinping, is the fact that China is throwing its weight behind African leaders when it comes to their call for Africa to have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Let's hear what was said earlier.
We have discussed areas of synergy in line with a call by South Africa and other African countries for the reform of institutions of global governance, notably the United Nations Security Council, and agreed that the continent of Africa that remains excluded from this very august and important body of the world should indeed be given a voice in the United Nations Security Council. We agree that the interests of the Global South must be fairly represented in all other multilateral forums. President Xi Jinping and I discussed the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine and its significant impact on developing economies in Africa and elsewhere. We both agreed on the importance of dialogue and negotiation between the two sides.
So certainly South Africa punching above its weight, but definitely not a small player when it comes to this Brics gathering. In fact, one of the other issues, you'll know that optics and tonality are important in meetings such as this. You would have just recently heard during the speech on behalf of President Xi Jinping that from Wang Wentao, talking about the fact that this gathering is not about people choosing sides. And we heard a similar sentiment from President Xi earlier, where he basically said, to quote him verbatim, that regardless of how the global dynamics and politics change, China remains committed towards its friendship with South Africa. So it's also speaking towards this constant straddling between a system of multilateralism, balancing that with bilateral relations that each of these countries have with each other, especially in South Africa, I should say, because China is our largest trading partner. We've got the figures. I mean, we went from around 1 billion in 1998 thereabouts to about 614 billion as at 2022. And so this is something that President Xi emphasized when he actually gave his remarks earlier.
Both President Ramaphosa and I believe that our two countries should be strategic partners, enjoying a high degree of mutual trust. We need to maintain the sound momentum of high-level exchanges, deepen exchanges and cooperation in various fields, steadily deepen political mutual trust, enhance experience sharing in state governance, and continue to support each other on issues concerning our core interests and major concerns.
So, Stephen, that's my lot for the day, starting off with the Chinese official state visit at the Union buildings, wrapping up the day, of course, here at the Sandton Convention Center. Day 2, we'll see more discussions from the business side. Of course, that's where the more tangible issues will be discussed. As I've said, a lot of what the world is looking out for is what exactly this meeting is about and what will come out of it. And that's where I'd like to bring in my colleague, Ntokozo Khumalo, who's been looking closely then at the discussions that have been taking place within the business community. Ntokozo?
Thank you, Zianda. Well, indeed, the focus has been around accessing or opening access to markets, opening up access to finance for businesses in South Africa to be able to really make more contributions in the Brics bloc. Conversations around youth, women, the role that they play in fast-tracking growth in South Africa, but also on the continent, and that the parallels that run there between the Brics bloc as well as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We heard from the Stand-Up Group CEO Sim Shabalala a little bit earlier on as he wrapped up that Brics Business Council working meeting that they had with various stakeholders, including SMEs and entrepreneurs that are looking to really make use of the various programs that government has set down, as well as the IDC. Yesterday we did see that signing between the IDC and Bank of China to really fast-track business growth and improve and enhance trade. But let's hear what Sim Shabalala had to say on the state of the South African economy and some of the opportunities that really remain untapped.
These guarantee that returns on investment are and will remain quickly accessible in the currency of the investor's choice. More competitive advantages arise from what a Chinese panelist called South Africa's celebrity products, Mr. President, which include rooibos tea, wine, and unique tourist experiences. This brings us to another of South Africa's strengths, which is South Africa's openness for the business and tourist traveler. People from all of our major trading partners enter South Africa either visa-free or with an e-visa.
So, as he said, there's celebrity industries that South Africa can really dig out those opportunities with the rest of the Brics bloc. And before the summit kicked off, I was actually covering the Brics Business Council trade fair, where they do have businesses from South Africa, 20 African countries, as well as Brics nations that are exhibiting and hopefully making some business deals. And I spoke to guys that are, manufacturing and producing those teas, producing those wines, and they are telling us that conversations with Brics nations are starting to pick up, with countries such as Brics, such as Brazil, starting those conversations to get those South African products into those markets. Of course, manufacturers in South Africa saying there isn't much of a local appetite for South African products, so it's working both on really driving the appetite here at home, but also opening up those global markets. And the issue of that Brics currency, once again, a huge talking point, and we're likely to hear a lot more on that conversation on how fast Brics can get the currency, whether it is necessary. We have heard from some business leaders earlier on saying that having a currency that is used by the Brics nations will actually make trade a lot more seamless, because businesses will not be having to search for the dollar and the fluctuation of those prices. But he did warn that there are some considerations to be made, and of course that is Sim Shabalala, who is the Group CEO at Standard Bank. Let's hear what those warnings are around the Brics currency.
Brics currency is possible or even desirable, with strong views expressed both for and against, with little consensus being reached. Seen from a banker's perspective, the debate would probably progress more fruitfully if the discourse maintained a sharper conceptual distinction between international payments on the one hand and reserve currencies on the other. For example, and as the example of the PAPS illustrates, under certain circumstances it may be possible to simplify international trade and the attendant payments using a collection of domestic currencies without any reference to any international reserve currency. It's also important to be realistic about the necessary characteristics of an international reserve currency. These include being a currency issued by a central bank with very high credibility in the implementation of monetary policy, being the currency of a state or supranational entity with an equally strong track record of fiscal policy and meeting its debts.
Sim Shabalala, the CEO of Standard Bank, ending that live report by Ntokozo Khumalo. Well, a lot more to come from the Brics summit here. A very busy first day. The leaders are in what they describe as a retreat session now. That's perhaps where some of the business will be done. Sanusha Naidu's been with me through the afternoon from the Institute for Global Dialogue. More live coverage for you through the evening and tomorrow. From myself, good night. Do stay with us for more coverage of this very important global event.